Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cave Across Apologetics. I'm Patrick,
And I'm Tony.
and we're in the midst of our response to responding to virtue ethics. And by I say us, I mean other people who have more letters after the end of their name. And I probably am discounting Tony because I don't have any letters after my name, but he does. So we're going through our book, Christian Ethics, 4 views. We're looking at 4 different types of views of how Christians specifically are to live correctly in God's world. And we've covered virtue ethics, saying kind of focusing more on the person of being virtuous, and then by extension, they will do ethical things. And then we've are getting into the ideas of divine command today and prophetic ethics. And we've already covered in the last episode the natural law response to virtue ethics. And that one talks about wanting to ground the ethical person into the natural world. And so here we're going to see the response of where the virtue ethicist and the divine command theorist and also the prophetic ethicist don't see eye to eye. And who knows, maybe they have a lot of overlapping similarity here. And I thought the last response was quite good. And so we'll see if that trend continues.
Right. And we'll see here that both of the next positions, the authors here, agree to a certain extent with where Kallenberg is coming from with his virtue ethics. But, there are clearly some disagreements, and
Right.
we'll see those as we walk our way through here.
Yeah, which probably tells you that at least in some point from these perspectives, first of all, they're a good matchup. So if you have just complete divestment and even commonality points, it's probably not a good group to put together, because then you're just focusing on maybe your definitions or kind of more first role things. But if a lot of people are saying I have a lot of to agree with here, then we're probably on some right path. So
Right, and it also prevents them from talking past each other,
right,
right?
yes,
Because
which
there's some things that they can agree with, and so now they know at least where the other person is coming from.
yes, agreed. One of the reasons that we always start with our definitions first. All right, so John Hare is the divine command response to the virtue ethicist, and he's going to say to the large extent that he agrees with Brad Kallenberg's chapter, but he thinks that he sometimes exaggerates and has a result, though, that he agrees with points that he is trying to make, and he cannot endorse his expression of them. And so he says that in the reply, he's going to focus on where he disagrees, at least with his formulation.
Right. So he thinks that Kallenberg exaggerates on how he formulates his virtue ethics. And so he's going to try to clear that up as he goes through his particular, his critique here. He says one important question is about body habituation. Kallenberg says a good nose for telling good from evil is not something one is born with. It's not something one can simply turn on like a light switch. Rather, skilled judgment is developed slowly by bodily training. That was Kallenberg's emphasis here. The body is important here, right? And so Hare says that sometimes this is true, and it is probably true that the body should never be ignored, but often the kind of training or habituation that is required is not bodily, right? He says often has much to do with giving priority in our minds to some good rather than some other good, right? For example, giving priority to finishing reading a philosophy article over watching the next episode of an enjoyable television series. So it's more than just, he's suggesting, forcing our bodies by habit to do something. Sometimes it's a changing of the mind, a giving a priority in our minds to some good over some other good.
Mm-hmm. I don't appreciate when books attack me like this. It's not enjoyable. I pay good money for them to let me know how to attack other people, not to be attacked myself. So, yes. The most important area that he has and to disagree with Kallenberg's formulation is a discussion of the human telos. Again, the telos is the the end point of humanity. What is the purpose for a human, for all humans? He says, Kallenberg says, virtue ethics claims that if we had a clear grasp of the telos, moral obligation would be straightforward. And so what Hare is saying is that his point is that we could know the human telos and not know our own individual telos. So you might know the purpose of humanity is, to know God and enjoy him forever. But what does that mean to you as, a person living in year 1 or year 1000 as a farmer? You're in year 1900s as a statesman. You're a stay-at-home mom in 2022, or you're fighting on the front lines of the Third Moon War in 3250.
Right.
What is the individual telos? What is your individual purpose end? And so each person, and church history is robust on this, is not always the same for everyone. There are people who run to and live to fight another day, and there are those who are willingly give themselves over to be captured, to be thrown to the lions, and in Caesar's auditorium to be a spectacle to the masses. Which way do we go? Right. So he's saying that Kallenberg doesn't provide, with his theory, the necessary telos, the endpoint to the
individuals.
Right.
For the individuals. Even if we know the telos of humanity or whatever, there's still an individual element that he doesn't think Kallenberg gives us to allow us to come up with what the virtues are.
Mm-hmm. So there are different good ways to be human. And if that's true, then the work for ethicists is not done even in agreement is reached about the common essence, humanity, and destination. The question is still open. Which of the good human ways of living is the right way for me?
Right. And then he says, finally, what about smartphones? Okay, so you'll recall that Berg talked about smartphones and fasting from them and that sort of thing, right? And so, let's go spend some time talking about smartphones. Smartphones gets beat up by Hare as well as by our next the ethicist as well. But anyway, he says, okay, what about smartphones? He says, I have resisted this technology for years. Go figure, right? He's saying that he resisted smartphones. But he says, he's given in to smartphones, and he sees many of the same dangers that Kallenberg does. However, he says a blanket condemnation of smartphones is an exaggeration. This area seems to me to fall not so much within divine command as within divine permission, he tells us, right? Divine permissions do not create obligations, right? They don't just because to do something doesn't mean that we're obligated to do it or we must do it, right? I may be permitted, he says, to own a smartphone without having an obligation to own one. God gave permission to Adam and Eve to eat all of the fruit in the garden except for the one tree. They had an obligation not to eat that fruit of the one tree, but they did not have an obligation to eat all the rest of the fruit, right? And so he makes this distinction here between obligation and permission. And he thinks a blanket condemnation of cell phones doesn't work when it's probably God has given us permission to do some good things. And at the beginning of this section on cell phones, he does list out a bunch of that he sees with regard to using a cell phone.
Mm-hmm. Right. So when Paul says all things are granted to me, but not all things are beneficial to me, is the same kind of point that he's making.
Yeah.
Well, there's more to say about why we should think God permits the use of technology for the sake of good things it allows. But he wants to end with a different point, going back to the claim about individual vocation. We should be open to the possibility that God will, through the Holy Spirit, guide us individually about whether owning and using this technology is right for us. And so we need to understand that the vice of one person is maybe the virtue of the other. I always liken this to trying to understand a person who has fallen into the sin of something like gambling. For me, gambling is if you want to waste $40, you go in, you have your $40, you blow it, and you go, oh, that was a fun time, or you don't go. There's no temptation to me. And then you walk into those places and you see people who need crowbars to be pried away from there. And so I have to realize that other people don't have that same inclination to be addicted to that. It's not to say, oh, well, that's stupid. I just have to say, there, but for the grace of God go I. And so here he's saying the opposite, where what's the correct path for you? You should study to be a pastor. You're there to work in the congregation. Is not the same as a person who says, well, I'm going to be a member of the congregation, and I'm going to have a bigger impact by sheer numbers. By holding Bible studies than my pastor ever will. But that doesn't make one virtuous or the other one incorrect. And so here he is saying that we must recognize that the Holy Spirit is going to be the entity that guides us into whether to take these different paths. And he's applying it here to the role of technology for us.
Right. And so his basic, criticism of Kallenberg here, it seems anyway, at least one of his basic criticisms is that there are different ways for the virtues to express themselves in various different individuals. And he's claiming that Kallenberg isn't recognizing this. And that's kind of a weakness in Kallenberg's perspective here. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, our question, and we'll wait till we get to him, is, is this somehow relativistic, right? Are the virtues relative to a particular person in a particular situation? Of course, we don't want that. And so we'll have to see how he, parses that out. But his main issue is Kallenberg isn't given room for each individual to have perhaps different virtues and purposes and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, here too, it's interesting to see the different takes between natural law. So she was almost presenting kind of a positive case approach for her point of view, while critiquing Kallenberg's. Here, the natural law or the divine command theorist is almost entirely just a critique, and so. There are some probably points that he's going to draw out when he does his presentation. But man, he spends too much time on cell phone usage, and it wasn't the best. But there are those few nuggets that we mined here to.
Well, yeah, and I like the distinction that he makes, near the end there with regard to permission and obligation. Mm-hmm. I think that's helpful.
Yes, very much so, so. And also slagging me on I should read more and turn off the TV more as well. So, all right, probably a good divine command there, if you will.
Yeah. All right. The last criticism perspective is from what our editor has labeled a prophetic ethic response, and so this is Peter Goodwin Heitzel. I think.
Heltzel? Yeah. Something like that.
Yeah.
Goodwin, I think, is probably why you want to include it, because you're going to get your audience on your side. I'm going to be good and win. So,
yeah. And this is a different kind of ethical perspective here. And I think, we've noted in some of the things, you suggested maybe a neo-Orthodox kind of perspective. We'll let the audience kind of see what they view, how they view this particular perspective. This, and in some ways, and I think he is intending to do this. Is he's making people somewhat uncomfortable here with this particular perspective. So we'll work our way through here and see if we can get through it and understand what he's talking about. So he begins by saying Kallenberg's presentation of virtue ethics is admirable in many ways, right? So again, just like the other two he praises him at the beginning and somewhat agrees with some of the things he has to say. He gives us four ways that he thinks Kallenberg's presentation is admirable. First, he says that Kallenberg pays close attention to the habit-forming process, as he argues for the intentional cultivation of virtuous habits in the lives of Christians. And so apparently that's an admirable thing that Herzl here believes. And second, he argues that virtue is best formed in Christian community, right? A needed emphasis, he says, in our individualistic culture today. Third, so the third kind of admirable quality he suggests here is that Kallenberg makes a persuasive case that if we do not intentionally form habits, they will be formed for us by our consumer-driven technological culture. And so he likes that as part of Kallenberg's presentation. And then fourth, he says that Kallenberg demonstrates that virtue ethics is deeply rooted in the Christian tradition. So those are at least some of the admirable ways that he thinks Kallenberg's presentation was helpful, right? And so, but that's as far as he gets here in terms of the good portion of it. So.
Right. And there's a lot of agreement that I have with him there. So let's see how we can destroy that. All right. So drawing on the wisdom of St. Augustine and Isaac of Nineveh, Kallenberg suggests fasting from iPhone usage. Again, we're always talking about cell phone usage here.
There's the iPhone, the cell phone. Right. Yeah.
It's only the iPhone. So if you're an Android user, you're virtuous.
Yeah, you're good to go. That's right.
I'm liking this guy more and more every time. So if you suggest fasting from iPhone usage because we are becoming a covetous people, however, he claims, Hetzel here, that an individual abstaining from smartphone usage does not adequately encompass the fullness of Jesus' teaching on fasting and the Sermon on the Mount, a template for prophetic ethics. And so that's one of the things that our editor made sure to focus on when providing a scriptural background to the prophetic ethics. So he goes on to say that he has great appreciation for Kallenberg's virtue ethics, but his central concern is the conspicuous absence of justice in the virtue ethics blinds him from seeing the sufferings of those wronged by injustice. So in the spirit of James William McCalladon, Kallenberg's first and best ethics teacher, he suggests that Kallenberg's virtue ethics can be fortified through a deeper engagement with race as a theological problem in conversation with African-American theological ethics. So make sure you have more Black authors on your bookshelf, read from those, cite from them, and you'll be more virtue ethics because you're going to be focusing on the pursuit of justice that he believes that Kallenberg is missing in his discussion here.
Right. And so we notice right away that Herzl here is talking from a background of social justice, perhaps even a critical race theory kind of background here, and we'll see that as we go. He goes on to say, in the spirit of this fourth beatitude, prophetic ethics sees fasting as a pathway to awakening a hunger and thirst for the liberating love and community restoring justice of the God of justice, right? And he in quotes Isaiah is suggesting that fasting has to do with justice, right? And so he says to consider fasting only in order to cultivate personal virtue, he tells us, misunderstands the political dimension of fasting. So, he doesn't think that Kallenberg deals correctly with the political dimension of fasting.
Right. My eyes are focused. They're not rolling right now. So,
right. Well, he gives some illustration. He talks about Martin Luther King fasting, while he's praying in prison, and that was kind of an illustration of the political dimension of fasting. Right.
So while calling for the cultivation of virtues, Kallenberg does not clearly delineate which virtues Christians are called to cultivate. nor does he clarify the difference and relationship between the biblical virtues, things like faith, hope, and love, with the four traditional Greek virtues, courage, justice, temperance, and wisdom. While offering an extensive discussion on the virtue of wisdom, Kallenberg's failure to mention the virtue of justice is deeply disturbing, he says. It's disturbing that it's almost purposeful. It's almost like he doesn't want to talk about it, is what I get from Hetzel here. Without justice as a moral norm, virtue ethics is susceptible to becoming a theological grammar of whiteness, the social power and privilege that white people gain through active participation in sinful social structures that mistreat and exclude people of color.
Right. And so he tells us that race matters in Christian ethics. Since every institution in the United States was founded to legitimate and perpetuate a white male power and privilege, faithful Christians should seek to understand how social structures benefit whites over people of color,
right,
where those structures came from, and how they are currently being administered. So race matters in Christian ethics.
So sorry, underground churches in China, if you're not talking about the privilege of white people while you're being hunted by the CCP, then you are doing virtue, or you're doing ethics incorrectly.
Yeah, he does mention when he's talking about the cell phone, he does mention the slave labor that's being done with regard to some of the Chinese folks and putting together some components of it. And he suggests that that's part of the critique that he's giving, that, we don't necessarily touch on that here, but I would suggest people refer to the article in the book, this particular chapter.
He does have a lot of citations, too, that he's trying to draw people to as well. So he uses his space well, I do believe, with footnotes to help offset them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. He used lots of footnotes. Yes.
And finally, fasting from one's smartphone may help cultivate one's personal piety. However, prophetic ethics reminds virtue ethicists that personal piety alone is unable to materialize God's justice in the world. So again, he wants to focus on justice being a virtue here that he believes is absent from the article that he's responding to. And so he's saying that these missed areas of opportunity to talk about things like the good that he believes that is being drawn out of things like fasting doesn't hit far enough. And so it's not just fasting for the purposes of self-reflection, but that self-reflection is to be utilized to motivate you to carry out a greater change within the world. And for him, that's the church going out and doing those things, but also understanding your power and privilege within the confines of being able to utilize your power for good, and that's to affect marginalized people.
Right. Okay, so those are our critiques of virtue ethics from a perspective of natural law theory, ethical natural law theory, and the divine command theory, and what our editor has called the prophetic ethics theory perspective, right? And so next, I think we move into the natural law theory of ethics and an explanation of what that is all about and how that helps us with regard to in ethical theories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it'll be interesting, too, to see from the critiques. So I believe that they submit their articles separately, and then they get each other's articles. So they're not going to be necessarily responding to points made within other people's point of view. They've only submitted their own. So it'll be interesting to see if we see at various dimensions of the different ethical approaches within now a second one that we're looking at to see, within the response, she's claiming that that you can be a virtue ethicist as much as you want, but as long as it's grounded in the nature of humankind. And so there'll be maybe something for you to look for as you're reading along with us. The IVP's Counterpoint series, the Spectrum Multiview of Christian ethics for views. And again, you can go to all the past episodes on caveofthecross.com or YouTube or Rumble or Spotify or your favorite podcast catcher, and they're all there. So you're welcome. And hopefully you've picked up the book. Hopefully this is an interest to you. This is something that I've noticed within my own personal devotion time and Bible reading. I'm picking out these areas now where I'm like, oh, that's very virtue ethicist of James to talk about this, or this is very even prophetic ethics having points of it's not just personal, but it moves you to a cultural standpoint. So even when I poo-poo maybe a view, I'm still looking for areas where I'm seeing these. And so, again, maybe we're on the right path to understanding a mixture of these, or maybe a single point of view will stand out to us by the time we get there. All right, so join us next time as we tackle the natural law. And so thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
We'll see you next time.